Hey guys, welcome to my home. Here's the kitchen and the pool and the living room. The sun porch. And we'll go down the stairs to the theater and the fish tank. Oh, there's one of the tanks. Let's stop there for a moment. This was actually my first tank after getting back into the hobby after, I don't know, 20 years. And there are a couple clowns, some soft corals, and not a lot goes on there. It's pretty much maintenance free. And downstairs is the man cave, I suppose. And the theater. And there's the highlight. I need a tank sitter. And this is a Red Sea 625, I think. It's about 120 gallons, maybe a bit more. I guess if you count the sump, it's probably closer to 175. But it's, the Red Sea tanks, I'm really impressed with, especially their lighting and the glass. It's just beautiful, but they're not cheap. So anyway, mostly it's LPS and tangs and a few, few soft corals, but mostly some bubble-tip-anemones that are quickly taking over the tank, at least this side. I'm definitely going to have to clear out some of these and rehome them before they really take over the tank. I think these started out with maybe 2, and they continuously split, and they're just very happy. There's sort of a outcropping of mushrooms. It's my understanding that they're anemones as well. So, as you can see, they are very happy. And this one is actually just beginning to split again. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's developed 2 mouths. And we'll see where he goes after that. He's been very happy on that rock for months. But they split regularly, especially if I feed them. If I feed them, I guarantee that at least half of them will split. So, the real interesting part of this tank is the fact that there are 7 tanks in this tank. That's been the hardest thing to get started. There are also 2 blue throat male triggers, which I didn't think they were going to get along, but they actually tend to school together. I've never seen any aggression with them. There's the powder-blue-tang, and there is a harem of anthias. And there's a purple-tang, a yellow-tang, a sailfin tang that's grown rather large, and there's a blonde naso-tang that is growing by leaps and bounds. And there is a regal blue, I suppose. And he has a personality all his own. He will get in a mood where I'm not sure if he just gets frustrated or he's hungry, but he will pick up hermit crabs and take them to the top and drop them. And there's no explaining it, except he just is in a bad mood, I suppose. And somewhere in here, there's a red flame angel that I've had for years. There he is. And he's really the most aggressive fish in the tank. He'll pick on anybody, any time of day for no apparent reason. And in the back, there are two more rose-tip-anemones and a pair of black ocellaris clowns that I guess are about 13 years old now. And they spawn regularly. And the rose tip that you see there is kind of interesting in that it almost looks like a long tentacle. I suppose that's because they constantly are playing in it and irritating it, but it hasn't moved in months. Well, actually, since I got it. And let's see if you can get a better look. When he spreads out, he's probably a foot tall. He'll climb up the back and just sort of, his foot's still planted in the bottom, along with another bubble tip beside it that is actually moved off of that side of the tank and settled there. Why, I don't know. But they're always looking for food. I feed them, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 times a day. They get nori in the morning for breakfast, and they know it. And then throughout the day, they get sprinkles of a spectrum pellet, which they tend to love. And this guy that's very, very docile is a filefish, and I was very lucky having got him from Diver's Den, that he has quite a taste for aptasia. As a matter of fact, since I got him, there's not been a single aptasia that I've seen, except maybe 1 or 2 that pop up for a while in the cracks of the rocks that he has problems to get into. Especially, I think there's one in that hole with the I don't know, the forest of anemones that he doesn't venture into. And I don't think these bubble tips are too, how do I want to say it? I don't think they sting like the carpet anemone, because the fish seem to swim through it from time to time, especially the little 6-line wrasse that's in here. He will just swim through it anytime, just like a clown. It's really interesting. There is also a Bristletooth, I think it is a spotted bristletooth that you might catch a glimpse of in the back. The triggerfish are interesting. I would call them like puppy dogs. If I take frozen food and hold it at the top of the tank, they will eat out of your hand. And they're always curious, and they're just a lot of fun. They just are. And there's the female clown. The male tends to stay under the bottom. I'm not sure why, unless they're always spawning and there are fry underneath there. And interestingly enough, most of the tangs sleep back in the back, and they seem to have no fear of the anemone whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I think they just like to aggravate the clowns back there or annoy them. There's the purple-tang again. They're all looking for food. One thing I will say about the Red Sea tanks is the lighting is just wonderful. It's only a white and blue, but the shimmer is just fantastic. And the programming is very easy. And a couple of other interesting things. This, as I understand it, is an encrusting goniopora that recently seems to have started creeping everywhere. I've never been able to keep green star polyps. They always seem to die. I'm not sure why. But these do really well. I do have to trim these xenia quite often. There's more over here, and they tend to be a nitrate sponge, so I leave them alone. As a matter of fact, my nitrates and phosphates are almost non-existent, which is probably the reason that I have such trouble with acropora and other stony corals. And there's an interesting problem that I have just in one corner of the tank. I suppose it's the flow that's not so good there, but I do get diatoms, and they will spread during the day, but they disappear at night. It's interesting. They haven't been a problem. It's just they pop up during the day and they disappear at night. So I'm not too worried about them at this point. There are Red Sea, I think they call them reef waves. Right there, I'm not impressed with those actually. I can't recommend them. At the top is a return for UV sterilized water that's taken out of the sump, and it circulates through the fish room. I'll take a trip back there to show you what's going on. And there are some urchins back there that, interestingly enough, they tend to, I suppose, put corals or whatever they can put on their back as some sort of protection, probably. This one seems to be really fond of the mushrooms. Oh, and these power heads are the Neptune versions, and they're just great. This tank is controlled by an apex, and there's a lot going on there. In the sump, there's a triple size, way oversized Omega protein skimmer, and an Ecotech pump and a Neptune pump running there, along with some extra plumbing that I did to take it back to the fish room, so that actually more is going on back there than in the sump here. So we'll pan through here one last time. There's the Peloton. So since I work from home, I get to enjoy the tank all day. And I will say that I have not done a water change in months on this tank. It's been set up down here for 2 years, and I think the only time that I've actually had to do water changes was a couple of times when I had leaks. So it's very stable. Water testing, it's just no problems there. Other than those few diatoms in the back, there's been no problems. So biologically, it must be pretty well balanced. And this closet here, which is just behind the tank and underneath the stairs, is the apex room. And there's a bit of a mess, and excuse the janky power strip that's there temporarily. But there are a couple of extra quarantine tanks if they're needed. And there's the fish food, that mostly pellets and nori. I really don't feed much frozen food. I do have it, but it just pollutes the tank, and the fish don't seem to be terribly interested in it. They would rather have pellets and flakes and nori, interestingly enough. And down there is all of the apex equipment. And there's a couple of power bars, the brain, and there's ozone and a couple of dosers, and those are the controls for the Red Sea power heads that are in there. And there is the controller for the Neptune pump that's in the sump, and there's the Ecotech controller for the pump that's in the sump. The sump has two pumps. One return is feeding a tank back in the back, and the Ecotech feeds a system of the UV sterilizer. Pretty much that's all it does. So we'll leave this. and we'll go back into the fish room slash storage room. And oh boy, is it a mess. So, all of the plumbing comes back from the main tank. It makes a pit stop with the Neptune-apex room, some of it. And there is the main quarantine tank. All of my fish spend at least a month there. Right now there's nothing going on. Really, there's just some rubble seeding coral and algae, and just a few outbreaks of xenia and actually some green star polyps. Of course, they'll die if I put them in the main tank. Why, I don't know. This tank came off Craigslist, actually. It's an acrylic that was easy to drill. That was the main thing. It was the previous owner had scratched it up pretty badly. So it's not suitable for a display tank, but it works very nicely for a holding tank for any fish that don't play well with others. And extra rock from my old reef tank has ended up here. And it, since it's piped into the main tank, it serves as a additional biological filter. And originally it was just, about a year ago, it was just bare rock. Since then, there has been tube worms, I suppose that filter feeders that have just gone wild. And they seem, I suppose, to take whatever extra nutrients or perhaps food that might be in the water column. And there's one old powerhead in here, and that's just about all the flow. And back in the back, this tank was an all-in-one, I think, because as you can see, it has its own little filtration system like that nano-tank upstairs. So before I set it up, I drilled a couple holes, one in the back and one for the return, which seemed to work very well. And right there is a butterfly fish that is just a wonderful fish. Unfortunately, she took a liking to some acans, and I didn't realize when I put her in the reef tank that they're considered to be not reef safe. She loves Aptasia, but I just don't trust her now. She's very friendly, very curious, always moving, always begging for food. But she's just a really good fish. I just wish I could put her in the main tank. She's beautiful. So, this rock, interestingly enough, I don't know where it showed up from, but it's full of halimeda, which is kind of unusual. I know some people like it. I think it's a form of algae that has a calcium-based cell structure. And I'm not sure if it's busy absorbing calcium out of the water that otherwise corals would use. So I'm wondering whether I'm going to keep it long term. I actually wanted to sell some of this rock on the Facebook group, but I didn't find many people who were interested at the time. I was surprised. There are also some leather corals that I got with the clowns that I've been busy selling them back to fish stores, but they just keep growing back almost as quickly as the bubble-tip-anemones. They're just very prolific. And something else that I will say, I'm not sure if you can see them, but definitely if I fed this tank, you would see bristleworms just collect right there in this one corner. I suppose that's where the food sweeps around from the water, and they just eat everything. So I would say that if you have a cleanup crew, or you want a cleanup crew, they are the best. I remember in the 90s when I was in the hobby before, they were considered a pest, and we took those out, every one we saw, which as it turned out was probably a bad thing, given that they're so good about keeping the bottom of the tank clean. As you can see, there's almost nothing on the bottom, and I do no cleaning. I don't even clean the glass, and it stays pristine. It's amazing. What little bit of hair algae grows there is only because the snails in there can't get to it. For some reason, they can't make their way onto that power wire. So I clean it off every so often. But the bristle-tooth tang that's in here just keeps everything else mowed down. I hope you can see it. It's as I have learned. There he is. This bristle-tooth is rare in that it has a white tail. And I got him from Diver's Den, and he's just been a treasure. I know he's not happy here. He's outgrown this tank. He really has. But the only way of getting him out of here is to completely take out all this rock, which was the main reason I wanted to sell the rock. So just so I could get him out and put him in the main tank. He's just a beautiful fish. There, somewhere in the midst of all of those rose tips, there is a clown that has ended up there because he just will not tolerate another clownfish in a tank. It wouldn't matter if it was 1,000-gallon tank. He would just fight until death. And I've had to fish him out of 2 tanks because he was just so bad. So like I said, this part of the purpose of this tank is for fish that don't play well with others or cause problems. The butterfly fish is here because she just will not keep away from akins. And the white-tailed bristle-tooth tang is here because initially I put him in here to kind of clean up the algae in the tank, which he did quickly, but there's just no getting him out of here now. And there's the clownfish. He's just very happy there with there's I think about 8 bubble tips right there that he landscapes, and they're very happy. This tank started out with 1 or 2 little ones, and now there are a dozen. And there's not much light in here. There's just one Ocean Revive that was kind of a leftover from my old reef tank. There were actually 2 here at one time, and one burned out. This was the one that's left. And it's, I guess it says something about these bubble tips, because they will just tolerate any amount of light, not getting fed regularly. They're very hardy, and I would say they're one of the least stinging and moving anemones. So you see, there's one there. I'm not sure, there's probably 8 or 9 right through there. There's one that has split off that appears to be moving to the back wall of the tank. Underneath, there's at least one. I'm not sure why he's out of the light. Maybe he likes the flow there. But as you can see, the clownfish is always protective. He will attack my hand if I go and put it in there. He's just really aggressive. Even not just to me, but other fish. And the other interesting thing that I will say about these bubble tips is that I think they mutate, because there are a few that are a different color. They're much darker, yet they still have almost yellowish orange tips. Very interesting, very unique. But they, since they were different from the others, they quickly moved off to their own little island up here. And there they've stayed. And in the back there is, I don't know if it looks more like a rainbow than the pink bubble tips. And there's a tiny power head in the bottom just to add a little flow, but I've never had a problem with the anemones traveling to a power head or the overflow. They've just been very sedentary. Oh, and when I say that they're reef safe, as you can see there, there's a colony of xenia that seems to be growing into the bubble tips. And if that were a long tentacle anemone like upstairs in the nano tank, it would sting and kill those. However, these rose bubble tips just seem to live in harmony with other soft corals, which I find interesting. Now we'll move on from this tank and we'll go to the refugium, which is plumbed in right here. And there is a cheap Amazon grow light up there and a Kessel that I spent probably 10 times as much originally as I did that bulb, and I don't think it's near as effective growing chaeto. There is a pump power head at the top that keeps this constantly spinning. From what I understand, that is a good thing for Chaeto in terms of growth. And I believe it because I'm constantly seeing the ends grow out like that, that I will end up harvesting and doing nutrient export. If I knew somebody that needed it, I'm sure I could sell some on Craigslist, but I just haven't bothered. This is something there temporarily. It's just an old biological filter that's just, I dumped the media in there until I could figure out what to do with it. And the return is just blowing water into that first. Not sure if it makes a difference, but it's there. So that is the extent of the filtration. There's nothing going on in this filter. From time to time I'll throw some of this carbon in there, but it just doesn't seem like much of a point. The water is pretty clear anyway. So this is the messy fish room. And back to the main tank in the theater. And we'll make a quick trip down the hall. This is my office. And interestingly enough, the fish, if you can see, they can see me come out of my office, and immediately they'll come to the side looking for food. They're always begging. As you can see, they're plenty fat. And I think that's something that helps with the aggression, especially with tangs. Keep them well fed, and the tanks seems to stay much more peaceful. I've had no problems keeping 7 tangs, whereas I've heard many people say they've had problems. And no outbreaks of ick. That says a lot for quarantine. And that's the end. If I can generate some interest, I really need a tank sitter sometime in a week or so. I have to make a trip to Europe, and this is the only thing that worries me. So I'll post a request out on the Facebook group, and maybe some kind soul in the Holly Springs, Raleigh area will help me out. Thanks for watching.